As we get closer to the end of 2017, we'll continue to look at the stories that got our attention this year, and some of them might even continue making headlines into the new year. We joined now in our studios in Johannesburg by SABC reporter Manqoba Mchunu, which is going to look back at the year 2017. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming through. I know you're not a morning person, but you had to wake up. Thank you so much for coming through. Now, Manqoba, where do we start? Let's start with the Oscar Pistorius story. Take us back as to what happened this year, of course, up until a point whereby he's going to appeal his sentence.
Well, Palisa, really, it's been a story that's been happening. I mean, it's 4 years now since Oscar Pistorius shot and killed his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp, on Valentine's Day in 2013. And we know that his trial happened on 2014, and he was found guilty of culpable homicide. Since then, the state appealed that ruling, and it got him to a murder charge at the Supreme Court of Appeal. And after that, he was then resentenced again by that High Court, Judge Thokozile Masipa, to an effective 6 years behind bars. But of course, the state again was not happy about that particular sentence, saying that it was simply just not enough for the crime that he had committed. It said that it was shockingly lenient, and that there were no grounds for Oscar Pistorius to really be, not to get the minimum sentence of 15 years. So we saw that argument again coming back this year as the state again appealed the sentence. So it went to the Supreme Court of Appeal for the second time to try and appeal a judgment by Judge Thokozile Masipa. So we saw the state going to the Supreme Court arguing the fact that Oscar Pistorius' sentence for killing Riva was simply inappropriate for the crime, and that he had not shown any remorse for that shooting, and that he did not really appreciate the nature of the crime that he had committed, and saying that, of course, even till this day, Oscar Pistorius has still not provided a clear reason or a reason to the court as to why he really pulled the trigger, why he killed Riva Steenkamp. Of course, we know that he was found guilty on murder on dolus eventualis, which means that he was found guilty on for shooting somebody who was behind the toilet door, whether it was Riva or whether it was an intruder. But the fact that he reconciled himself and still pulled the trigger 4 times, that made him to be guilty of dolus eventualis. So the court says he provided different, the state says he provided 3 different versions of why he shot. So they're saying that he hasn't shown remorse because he hasn't really explained why he pulled the trigger. So that was one of their main contentions as they went to the Supreme Court of Appeal to argue this particular case. And we know that, of course, when that ruling came back, the judges said that they do agree with the state. They believe that Oscar Pistorius has not shown true remorse or genuine remorse for his crime. And also the state had argued that, in fact, Judge Thokozile Masipa elevated his regret from regret to remorse. So that was the finding of the Supreme Court of Appeal, that he did not show any remorse, and that he did not provide any reasons, a suitable reason. It did not take the court into his confidence to explain why he really pulled the trigger. And then also the fact that they were scathing in their ruling to say that also he does not appreciate the gravity of the crime that he committed, how serious that murder that he committed was.
But the Pistorius saying that they will also appeal, they will now approach the Concord, but with the NPO on the other hand saying that they're convinced that the decision will not be overturned.
Well, we know, Palisa, this is not the first time that Oscar Pistorius has tried to go to the Constitutional Court. You remember that after his conviction was turned to murder, he then approached again the Supreme Court of Appeal, and he went as far as the Constitutional Court. But we know that that didn't go well at that time. The Supreme Court of Appeal said that it simply would not entertain the matter, so he could not go through. It basically rejected his application to try and have his matter heard there. This time around, after the Supreme Court of Appeal has made this ruling, which effectively means that he now has been sentenced for 15 years for murder, which is a minimum sentence for murder in South Africa. So after this, the court found that he had no compelling reasons or substantiative reasons that could, force the court to deviate from that minimum sentence of 15 years. So basically, that means that he'll have to spend 15 years behind bars, which is a prescribed minimum. So it's not easy to have that overturned. He'll have to present constitutional issues how his constitutional rights were violated, for example, in court to try and argue this. And we know that so far what he said is that he says the SCA, when it made its ruling to extend his years, it did not take into account, or it ignored the findings of the High Court that there were compelling and substantial reasons for it to deviate from that.
All right, Manqoba, we'll wait and see what happens at the Concord next year. Let's move to one thorny issue, life Esidimeni. I know this is the one story that caught many people's attention, a very sad story. Dr. Manamela giving her testimony, Dr. Silibano, and the final days of the hearings, or the arbitration hearings, really, where we saw Judge Dikgang Moseneke, breaking down as well.
Yes, it's been a long time coming. I mean, since we started, it's been a real emotional roller coaster. You know, there've been tears, there've been horror stories that you've heard of how families found their loved ones starving, some of them even eating the packaging of the food that they'd been given, you know, and how some of them who had already died, when postmortems were carried out, they were found with plastic bags in their stomach contents as well as paper to show that, you know, they were really hungry. And we know that the findings of the health ombudsman were that most of them died from dehydration, hunger and a lack of care, because there was no basic care, there was no trained staff at those NGOs. So it really brought to surface the truth about what really happened at Life Esidimeni, because up until this year, we'd only known that 36 patients had died last year. And we know that when Qetani Mahlang was called here on Morning Live, she also explained that she knows that 36 had died and that they were going to investigate. But when that report by the health ombudsman came forward, it really showed a shocking, it revealed a shocking reality of what had really happened at Esidimeni. So we saw really families coming out and telling their stories, as well as the officials that are involved being called to account, being called to answer for their role. And of course, it frustrated Judge Moseneke, the fact that most of them, including Dr. Manamela, Dr. Silibano, did not want to take responsibility. They were shying away from taking responsibility, always pointing to the collective. We took this as a collective. It was not my decision, even though I'm the mental health director, but still I was working as part of a collective. And then, of course, when one of those officials, who is the former HOD, Dr. Panisile Bade, on his last day, when he gave his testimony, he apologized to the families. Yes. And there was a very heartfelt apology.
Many people saying that they did not see that with Dr. Manamela.
No, no, it was very different from Dr. Manamela, because you remember when Dr. Manamela was given her chance to say her final piece, what she said, first of all, she said, I'll come to the families later. Let me start here. First of all, these hearings were unfair to me. These hearings were biased. My rights were violated. And then she went to the families. She said that I hope the families find closure in all of this. You know?
Not taking any responsibility and accountability.
Not taking any responsibility. But it was different somehow with Dr. Silibano, because he stood up. He even said, if I could kneel, I would kneel to you. I want to come and touch you. I want to come and ask for apology in person. I want to come to your houses and apologize. This will forever be in my heart. This will live with me for the rest of my days. Right. So he was really showing some remorse sort of remorse there.
So what happens next? Of course, we're expecting the former health MEC, Qedani Mahlangu, to take the stand when the hearings continue next year?
Yes, yes, indeed. And that's one of the most highly anticipated testimonies in this case, because you remember that she was indeed the one who was in charge of the department. So basically, she was the one who, according to other officials, gave the directive for that Esidimeni closure to happen. So her testimony really will be highly anticipated by the families who are seeking answers and who are very angry because they've held different talks with her prior to that, asking her not to do this. So, of course, other officials like Dr. Silibano and Dr. Manamela have also pointed to her as being one of the officials who really saw through this process. So her testimony will be crucial. She'll face very tough questions, and we're yet to hear her side of the story as to why really she did this.
Manqoba, there is so much to talk about, but due to time constraints, let's just leave it at this. But of course, these are stories that will also be coming out in the new year. Thank you so much indeed for coming through.
Thank you.
And all the best for the new year. Thank you. Manqoba Mchunu is a reporter here at the SABC News, and he worked on some of major breaking and investigative stories in the year 2017. So we're just, going back a little, but of course talking more about Oscar Pistorius and Life Esidimeni.